There are only 4 months left till GCSEs. I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to do for each subject to ensure you're getting the highest grade possible. Welcome to Mission Undercover. For this, you need to watch videos on all the topics that you don't understand. And if you don't know how to do certain things like solving quadratics or certain specific skills, then you need to make sure that you're learning about these and watching videos and using AI to help you to teach you what you need to do, asking your teachers for help as well, and maybe asking your friends to help explain you different topics. When you're using AI to help explain things to you, you need to have a specific prompt to tell it what specific exam board you're doing, what type of explanation you need, and what level you're working at, so that I can tailor what it explains to you in the way that will most benefit you. But the most important thing is you need to get through loads of practice questions for maths because that's the only way you're going to improve and understand how to actually apply the skills that you're learning. So there's a lot of websites you can use, but some of them here are Maths Genie, First Class Maths, Corbett Maths, Dr. Frost, and of course, the greatest PMT. Okay, English language. For this, you need to understand exactly what each question is looking for. Is it language analysis? Is it structure? What exactly is the question asking you to do? You need to understand exactly what each question wants. And for that, you need to look at the mark schemes and what criteria it's asking you to include within the answer. This also usually comes with a model paragraph. So you know exactly what a good answer looks like. So you need to be looking at those mark schemes and trying to understand what you need to include in your paragraphs. I also recommend again for this exam practice so that you know exactly what to write and how to write it and how you can adapt to different types of text that they might give you. So for that, you can also use AI to help generate exam papers for you so that you can get that practice in and make sure you're fully confident with any type of question that may come up, especially for question 5. So in a couple of weeks time, I'm going to release a English language question 5 guide. I'll break down how to exactly answer question 5 for AQA. Instead of just gimmicks and memorized texts, I'll actually break down how you can approach a question when it's given to you. So you don't have to memorize things in advance, but you can just respond to the question as it comes to you. English literature. You need to make sure that you know exactly how to formulate your essay response. I recommend that you watch my full English literature guide. You can just go back a bit in my channel to watch that. I also have English literature resources that can help you to improve, which are linked down in the description. Make sure to check those out as well. I also need you to make sure that you learn your quotes based on the themes and the characters that could come up. They will always ask you about a theme or a character. There'll be nothing else that they can ask you about. So you need to learn your quotes based on that. Have at least 5 quotes for each theme or each character that could come up. Look for good quotes, similes and metaphors, not just any random quotes that come up, not just words and phrases. You need to have a judicious method so that you can say a lot about a little. That's the key thing that you need to do. And most importantly, you need to memorize your context and link what your response is to the context and what the writer's purpose could be. You need to understand what the writer actually wants to do. What is the writer trying to consider? For example, why would the writer say a specific thing? Why would he use a specific word? And what's his wider purpose? Is he trying to reflect on gender structures within contemporary society? Is he trying to reflect on inequality? What is he actually trying to get at with what he's writing in the piece? Then you can follow on from that by considering how that actually impacts the audience, contemporary audiences, so that's people at the time, and also modern audiences today, and how they would consider it based on the events in the world today. And finally, make sure to do lots of practice so you don't run out of time. On paper two, you can spend a little bit less time on unseen poetry because the exam response needs to be shorter and there's a lot less requirements for it. So you need to focus your answer on inspector calls and poetry because there's more marks there and because it's much harder to actually get a lot written for that. So you can spend more time on that and sacrifice some time on unseen poetry if you're struggling with timing. When you're doing an exam, you need to make sure that you get in the flow state. This is where you don't even notice the time passing by. You're so focused and so locked in that you don't even realize that the time is passing by. And you're just getting through the answers as quick as you can so that you can have time to check at the end, but you're also getting the optimal output possible. To make sure that you're doing this, you could try meditating for a few minutes a day just so you can get that focus and make sure that you're more focused on what you're doing. Make sure that you're less distracted. But you can also try to use a bit less social media and high dopamine activities before your exams so that your focus is optimal, so that your brain isn't distracted and focusing on other things whilst you're trying to write your exam answer. You need to have optimal focus. You need to be completely locked into what you're doing. And the only way to do that is by making sure that you're taking yourself out of the distractions of the world and trying to make sure that you're focused on the one thing that matters at that moment, which is your exam. You need to treat it like a performance. So you need to make sure that you have the optimal conditions, that you're fully prepared and you are minimizing your distraction. This is why I opt not to take water into exams, because if you look up from your paper for 1 minute and drink some water, then that's not going to help you. That's going to ruin your focus, and it's going to take you out of the flow state and make you distracted. And then you might get sidetracked. You might forget what you're saying. You might not be focused as much anymore, and your optimum output is not going to be produced anymore. So you need to make sure you're fully focused and that nothing is distracting you. And that includes water. That includes like having a lot of stationery outside a pencil case. Just take all your stuff out before and put it on the table. Nothing else, just your stuff that you need. That's it. Okay, sciences. First thing you need to do is memorize your key concepts. That could be electrolysis, nuclear fusion. These definitions you need to have nailed down because a lot of the time they form part of mark schemes and they're at least 1 mark. You have to say that as your first point and then you can expand on it by explaining. The second thing you need to do is understand mark schemes and what they actually want you to do. So there's usually a set mark scheme for some questions and that never changes. So you need to have that memorized. And when you see a question that's familiar to you, you need to just regurgitate that exact mark scheme. Another thing I'd say is don't neglect data, graphs, and calculations. This is a sizable chunk of the paper, and many people just ignore it because it seems easy and you'll figure it out when you get to the paper. But you need to practice these as well because you could really slip up here and lose a lot of marks if you're not familiar with this and if you're not practicing it enough. And finally, when you're in your science exam, just take your time because there's a lot of spare time at the end. It doesn't take that long to complete the paper. So just go through each question calmly, double check your answers whilst you're doing them, and make sure that you don't make any silly mistakes. Okay, economics. Once again, I'd say don't ignore the basic stuff like basic supply and demand graphs, like definitions like the basic economic problem. Just because they're simple doesn't mean you'll remember them. You still need to revise them appropriately. Next, you need to know your definitions well because always at the start of answers is gonna make you write the definition of the specific thing it's asking you about, and then you can expand on that. It's like sciences. You need to know your definitions and be able to regurgitate them effectively. And finally, the most crucial skill in economics is evaluation. You need to be evaluating in all your answers. When it gives you a figure, you need to take data from the figure and then evaluate. You need to give your own opinion based on the evidence that it presents you. So you need to consider all the facts, outline for and against, and then you need to make a solid judgment and conclusion. And if you don't have that, then your chances of getting a higher mark are significantly reduced. And the last thing I'd say for economics is don't be afraid to use any wider knowledge you may have, because all the questions, if you notice, they say use your economic knowledge and the things you know to justify your conclusion and justify your view. So don't be afraid to use anything you might have heard on the news. Don't be afraid to use any current events that you might have seen recently, and then use them to help justify your exam answer and justify what you're saying. Use them as an example and use it to develop what you're saying so that you seem like a more knowledgeable candidate and so that you're more likely to get higher marks on those essay questions. Next up, languages. You need to revise key vocabulary based on the different themes they have. So there's themes like family, there's themes like technology, travel, tourism, stuff like that. You need to revise some key vocabulary for each of those. And then you need to have some complex phrases, not just simple things. So you can use these complex phrases in your general conversation speaking, but also when you're doing your writing. You need to have these in, and then that can elevate your mark. Otherwise, it's just going to be a basic answer and you're not going to get any extra marks from it. For speaking, I'd recommend using AI as a conversation partner. Give it your photo card or your role play and tell it to ask you, and then you respond in French or Spanish or whatever language you're doing, so that you can actually practice properly speaking to someone or something in this case, but you're actually giving response to answers. And this is particularly helpful for general conversation because it asks you a question and you might not know what's going to ask you. And that's what's going to be like in the exam. There's going to be a random question and you have to come up with your answer on the cuff. So you need to try and do that with AI. Use it as a sparring partner to ask it to ask you questions and you respond in your language of choice. Next up, geography. The number one thing for geography is you need to know your case studies. You need to know key facts and details like death rates, casualty rates, how much money was spent on the particular event. These are particularly important things that you need to know so that you can use them in your 9 marker or your 6 marker or whatever type of essay question you might have or long form question you may have. And then the second thing you need to do is remember key terms like urbanization, rural urban fringe, because they could ask you that as a specific question to define, but also they could use that in a longer question so that they can ask you to evaluate whether this has been successful or evaluate whether this has been applied in a certain area. The third thing for geography is always use the figure that they give you. A lot of the levels of the marking tell you that if you don't use a figure, then you're restricted to a certain level of the marking. So you can lose a lot of marks if you're throughout the paper not referring to the figure that they give you. So always refer to the figure. And finally, bring a calculator to your exam. There was a lot of people that forgot to bring calculators to geography because it doesn't seem like you need one, but there's always lots of calculation and mean type questions in there. So you need to have your calculator and make sure that you're using it in the exam. History. The number one thing that you need to know is your facts and your knowledge. You need to have those absolutely nailed down, your dates, your key events, so that you can use them in your essay responses to support what you're saying and support your argument. The second thing is you need to manage your timings effectively. Don't spend too long on lower mark questions and then run out of time for the longer answer questions. And even on like an essay question, you can leave out your introduction and then focus on doing your main body paragraphs and your conclusion, because that'll give your answer more value than if you do an introduction and a couple of paragraphs but miss out your conclusion and final paragraph. Your essay response, you need to consider both sides of the point, but you also need to substantiate your judgment throughout and make clear what you're actually arguing for throughout. And then in the conclusion, you can summarize all the points and explain why you've gone for a certain point of view and explain why you've specifically chose that this is the right thing, or I agree with this, or I disagree with this. You need to be an evaluative conclusion so that the examiner knows exactly what you think about the essay question. Okay, now that you know what to do for each subject, you need to make sure that you're building your routine and getting that consistent practice in so that that compound effect builds over time and you get the results that you want. I'd recommend checking out this YouTube channel called Shamalam.7, and he has a project called the Deep Work Club that helps you overcome procrastination and make a regular habit of waking up early and getting your most difficult work done so that you can be more productive. I'd recommend checking it out. I'll have a link in the description. Make sure that you actually get through all the work you need to do. Don't just delay stuff. Don't procrastinate. Make sure you're getting the difficult stuff done first so that the easier stuff can be done afterwards, because you're more likely to do that anyway. You need to make sure that you're locking in and getting those priorities done. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Thank you for your support. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.